Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and welcome to the fireside once again. Of course, particular welcome if it's your first time joining us here by the fireside. And a fire is exactly what we need tonight, I must say. For certainly in England, at least, the weather has rather changed of late, and it is freezing cold this evening. No doubt it is the same, of course, in Scotland and further north. That is very much what put me in mind of this evening's story. And it is something of a departure tonight, for I do not have a story of my own for you. Instead, I have laid hands on a certain journal, a certain ship's log, in fact, and that is what I am going to read to you this evening. Something from the snowy wastes, and therefore perhaps thematic with that change in the weather. So, what does this doctor aboard an Arctic expedition have to tell us all? September the 11th, latitude 81 degrees, 40 minutes north, longitude 2 degrees east, still lying to amidst enormous ice fields. The one which stretches away to the north of us and to which our ice anchor is attached cannot be smaller than an English county. To the right and left, unbroken sheets extend to the horizon. This morning, the mate reported that there were signs of pack ice to the southward. Should this form of sufficient thickness to bar our return, we shall be in a position of danger, as the food I hear is already running somewhat short. It is late in the season, and the nights are returning to us. This morning, I saw a star twinkling just over the foreyard, the first since the beginning of May. There is considerable discontent amongst the crew, many of whom are anxious to get back home in time for the herring season, when labour always commands a very high price upon the Scotch coast. And yet their displeasure is only signified by sullen countenances and black looks. But I heard from the second mate this afternoon that they contemplated sending a deputation to the captain to explain their grievance. Well, I much doubt how he will receive it, for the captain is possessed of a fierce temper, and he is very sensitive to any infringement upon his rights as a captain of the vessel. Perhaps I will venture to him after dinner and exchange some words. I mean, he's more likely to tolerate such a discourse from me than from one of the men. Visible off our starboard quarter, there are now volcanic rocks interspersed with white seams, which are glaciers. It's curious to think that there is no human nearer to us than Greenland, which is some 900 miles away as the crow flies. The captain is taking a risk, there is no denying, for there is no whaler in these latitudes so late in the season. 9 p.m. I have spoken to the captain, and though the result was hardly satisfactory, I am bound to say that he listened to what I had to say very quietly, even deferentially. When I had finished, he put on that look of iron determination which I have frequently observed upon his face, and he paced rapidly backward and forward across the narrow cabin for some minutes. I wondered if I had offended him. Well, he dispelled that notion by patting me on the arm in a gesture so tender it could almost have been a caress. Look here, you. Doctor, look, I'm sorry that it's you. I'm sorry I took you. Honestly, I'd pay £50 to see you back on Dundee Quay. It's hit or miss with me this time, lad. There's fish to the north. I know it. How dare you shake your head at me when I have seen them from the masthead, seen them 2 and 20 in as many minutes, and not one of them under 10 feet long. You think I could leave now with one infernal strip of ice between me and my fortune? Well, perhaps it'll blow north tomorrow, and then we could fill up this whole ship and be away before the frost even catches us. Maybe the wind will blow from the south. Well, the men are paid for risking their lives. And for me, there's more that binds me to the other world than to this one. I'm sorry for you. When you say to me that you were engaged, lad, well, yes, and I was engaged at the time, the woman that I eventually married, beautiful Flora, and I held a locket bearing her picture before Captain Craigie, and yet he did not react as I expected at all. Curse you! Curse you! What is your happiness to me? That you dangle your photograph there in front of my eyes? Well, for a moment, the intensity of expression suggested to me that he might be about to strike me. But in something of a frenzy, he stormed up on deck, and he stormed back and forth over the wooden boards and left me sitting in the cabin below, quite astonished. And I can hear his pacing even now as I write. I would like to sketch the character of the man, of Captain Nicholas Craigie, but I must confess that it is somewhat presumptuous, for I am vague and uncertain of his character at all. Every time I feel like I am grasping some clue of the man, he casts himself in a new light and upsets my conclusions. But I shall attempt at least some record of the captain. They do say that the outer case does at least somewhat reflect the soul within. And Captain Craig is tall, handsome, dark, but his limbs possess a twitching quality that speaks of perhaps nervousness or else an excess of energy within him. He is certainly resolute and almost reckless, it should be said. There is something in his eyes that speaks of, well, perhaps I could best describe it as horror. And he is often tempestuous in his anger, so much so that he will sometimes lock himself up within his own cabin. The man sleeps badly, I know that, for I am not far from his cabin and I can hear him shouting in the night often, but I cannot distinguish the words. Now, this is only one phase of the man's character, for otherwise he is a very agreeable companion. He is well read and pleasant often. And I will not soon forget the way he managed to handle the ship in those stormy gales that we had back in April. I mean, it was masterful, and yet during it, the man was so cheerful, almost hilarious in his demeanor, whilst he was battling the storm and the lightning and the wind. It seemed almost as if the thought of death was pleasant to him. I think that there has been some great sorrow that has overtaken Captain Nicholas Craig. Perhaps I would feel the same if I were to lose Flora. Well, so at last to bed, as Pepys used to say. The candle has burnt low, and now that the nights are returning, we need to use them again. And the steward has turned in for the night, so there's no chance of another. September the 12th. Calm, clear day, and still lying in the same position. What wind there is comes from the southeast, but it's very slight. Captain is in better humour and apologized to me at breakfast for his rudeness. He still looks somewhat distrait, however, and retains that wild look in his eyes, which in a Highlander would mean that he was fey. At least our chief engineer remarked as such to me, and he has some reputation amongst the Celtic proportion of our crew as a seer and expounder of omens. What it means for our captain, I don't know. Unlike the captain, most of our crew are Scots. And I should say it is curious that superstition should obtain such a mastery over such a hard-headed and practical race. It has been something of an epidemic upon this voyage, this notion of superstition. I have even considered portioning out rations of sedatives and nerve tonics to the entirety of the men with their grog on Saturdays. The first symptom that struck us was when we were leaving Shetland. And many of the crew started speaking of hearing screams in our wake, saying that there was something following us, something that was unable to overtake us, something that they couldn't see. Now, it was difficult to persuade many of the men at night to go seal fishing. Uh, Personally, I believe it was the noise of, I don't know, creaking rudder chains or the cry of some seabird or other. There could not have been anything unnatural to it. Yet it is hopeless to argue with the Scots when they get going, I should say. And I even mentioned the matter to the captain, and yet he took it gravely. I thought, as an officer, he would be above such vulgar delusions. And all of this talk of superstitions leads me up to what Mr. Manson, the second mate, a Londoner amidst the Scots, said that he saw a ghost last night. Well, at least it was a refreshing new topic, something different from all the bears, the seals, and the whales. And he swears that the vessel is haunted. I have even given him chloral and bromide of potassium to fend away such delusions in the man. And I was forced to keep a straight face during the entire rendition of his story, which he relayed to me thus. Well, Doctor, I was on the bridge, 4 bells into the middle watch, so the night was at its darkest. And John McLeod, the harpooner, he came aft from the forecastle head, and he said he'd heard a strange noise just off the starboard bow, and he said it was like a bairn crying or a wench in pain. So I came up with him too, and then I heard it as well. Now, in 17 years in country like this, I have never heard a seal make a sound like that, nor no bird neither. We were standing there on the forecastle head, and the moon came out from behind a cloud, and we saw a white figure out on the ice. It was just in the direction of that sound. Now, I sent for the rifles. McLeod and I went down out onto the pack. Maybe it was a bear. We could hunt. Well, we followed the cries maybe a mile. We came round a hummock of ice and we were nearly on top of it. Whatever it was standing there, waiting for us seemingly. Well, I don't know what it was. It wasn't a bear. I mean, it was tall, and white, and straight. And if it wasn't a man or a woman, I'd stake my davy on it. It was something worse. So I made for the ship, at a run, McLeod just beside me. I was precious glad to be back aboard. Look, I signed my articles of duty to the ship, and on the ship I will stay. I won't be back on that ice again. No, not after sundown. Well, his story, that was it as he relayed it to me. And in spite of his denials, I very much suppose it was a bear, for they are often adopting that position of rearing up onto their hind legs when they are alarmed or startled, such as by 2 sailors running around a hummock of ice towards one. So, could have had a resemblance to a human, to somebody shaken up in the darkness out on the ice, almost alone, could easily have resembled some form of apparition. Well, it was an unfortunate occurrence, particularly as it has rattled the crew. Even our harpooners, who are some of the steadiest amongst the men, are badly shaken. Apart from all of this absurd superstition, it is more cheerful now, for the pack is opening up toward the south, and I've heard that there is an abundance of shrimp, which some say that is a good predictor of the possibility of fish, as they call whales amongst such fraternities. September the 30th. had an interesting conversation with the chief mate, Mr. Milne, upon the bridge. It seems that our captain is as great an enigma to the seamen and even to the owners of the vessel as he has been to me. Mr. Milne tells me that when the ship is paid off upon returning from a voyage, Captain Craigie disappeared, and he's not seen until the approach of another season, and he walks quietly into the office of the company and asks whether his services will be required. He has no friend in Dundee, nor does one pretend to be acquainted with his early history. His position depends entirely upon his skill as a seaman, and the name for courage and coolness which he'd earned in the capacity of mate before being entrusted with a separate command. He is not a Scotchman, and his name is, I think, an assumed one. Well, Mr. Milne thinks that he has taken to whaling because it is the single most dangerous profession that he could find. There was one season when he did not return and did not take up the same post, and it coincided exactly with the last Russian-Turkish war. Captain Craigie was seen the very next season, the next spring, with a puckering wound about his neck. Well, some strange coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps the man had been to war. Well, the wind is veering east. The ice is getting closer to us. And on every side of us, there is an expanse of solid white. That south lane of blue is closing up every day. Good God, the captain is taking a risk. Especially as I am told that the potatoes are almost finished, and the biscuits are not far behind them. Now, the captain spends most of his time up in the crow's nest, staring out upon the horizon, alone from most of the crew. 7:30 p.m. My deliberate opinion is that we are commanded by a madman. Nothing else can account for the extraordinary vagaries of Captain Craigie. It is fortunate that I have kept this journal of our voyage, as it will serve to justify us in case we have to put him under any sort of restraint. A step which I should only consent to as a last resort. Curiously enough, it was he himself who suggested lunacy as not mere eccentricity as the secret of his strange conduct. He had been upon the bridge about an hour ago, and I there beside our captain, who was peering out of a glass and then pacing up and down the deck. Most of the men were below at tea, and we were practically alone together. We watched the sun sink down over the ice fields, and I felt a presence at my shoulder, and I heard the captain's voice, and I noticed that he was staring in horror over the ice. There was surprise and somehow joy mingled too in his expression, and despite the cold out on deck there was perspiration running down his forehead. His limbs twitched almost like he was suffering some epileptic fit. His mouth was set into a hard line. He stared out there. Look there, man, there, between the hummocks. Now around there, past that far one. You must see her, there, flying from me. By God, she's flying. She's gone. Oh God, she's gone. Well, the last was said with such a whisper of concentrated agony that I don't think I shall ever forget it. He was there, clinging to the ratlines, trying to get some last glimpse of whatever it was that he'd seen out there. So livid was he that I had to lead him down to a cabin and try to restore him with some brandy. I managed to bring him back somewhat, at least some blood back to his whitened face. You saw it, didn't you? No, I saw absolutely nothing. No, how could you? Could you see it without a glass? You couldn't. A glass showed her to me. Oh, a glass in the eyes of love. Don't let the steward in. He'll think me mad. Bolt the door. And I did so, on my captain's orders. I don't think I am mad. Do you? Man to man? Am I mad? Well, I think you have something on your mind. Something that is exciting you. Something that is doing you harm. Right there. Yeah, there's plenty on my mind. But I can still work out a latitude and a longitude. I can still handle my sextant and my logarithms. You couldn't prove me mad in court, could you? Well, it was curious hearing the captain debating his own sanity in front of you. Curious and nerve-wracking, it should be said. Look, perhaps not, but I think that we should get you home as swiftly as we possibly can. Home so that you can recover yourself. Well, home. There's one word for me and two for you there, lad, isn't there? Two for your Flora. You want to get back home to her now? Wow. The bad dreams, are they a sign of madness? Sometimes. Yes, sometimes they are. What else? What else is a sign of madness? Well, sometimes pains in the head, perceiving noises, flashes of light before the eyes, and delusion. Ah, delusions is it? Right, one of them. What is a delusion? Well, delusion is seeing a thing that is not there. But she was there. She was there. And with that, he stormed out of the cabin. Well, I don't know what he had seen out on the ice, some kind of shock to his system, but the captain is a greater and greater mystery to me every day, I have to say. Some of the officers have the idea and notion that he is suffering from a guilty conscience of some kind. Personally, I think he has had the terrible usage at the hands of fortune. I think there is more of martyr than of criminal to our captain. The wind was at the south tonight. God help us if it blocks us in. For that pass that we have is our only means back to safety. We are on the edge of the main Arctic pack, and that might hem us in between two packs. And if that should happen, God help us, I say again. September 14th, Sunday, and a day of rest. My fears have been confirmed, and the thin strip of blue water has disappeared from the southward. Nothing but great motionless ice fields surround us, with their weird hummocks and fantastic pinnacles. There is a deathly silence over the whole expanse, which is horrible. There is no lapping of the waves now, no cries of seagulls or straining of sails, but one deep, universal silence. The murmurs of seamen, the creak of the boots upon the white, shining deck, all of them seem discordant and out of place in that vast silence. Our only visitor was an Arctic fox, a rare animal upon the pack indeed, though common enough upon the land. He did not come near the ship, however, but after surveying us from a distance, fled rapidly across the ice. This was curious conduct, as they generally know nothing of man, and being of an inquisitive nature, become so familiar they are easily captured. Incredible as it may seem, even that little incident produced a bad effect upon the crew. "You're pure beastie, kens mair and sees mair than you nor me," was the comment of one of the leading harpooners, and the other nodded with acquiescence. It is vain to attempt to argue against such puerile superstitions. Well, They've made up their mind that there is a curse upon the ship, and nothing will ever persuade them to the contrary. The captain has remained somewhat reclusive, almost in seclusion, pretty much all of the day at least. So, all save for the service, Sunday service, and on whaling boats, it is a Church of England prayer book that they use. The men, however, are all Catholics or Presbyterians, and as it is foreign to both, neither of them complain about it. So there is something to be said for the system. We watched a glorious sunset across the ice fields, and the ice out there seemed to form a lake of blood. It was a very fine and weird effect. The wind is veering round to the north, so perhaps all will be well. September 15th. Today is Flora's birthday, dear lass. It is well that she cannot see her boy, as she used to call me, shut up amongst the ice fields with a crazy captain and a few weeks' provisions. No doubt she scans the shipping list in the Scotsman every morning to see if there is a report from Shetland. I have to set an example to the men and look cheery and unconcerned, but God knows my heart is heavy at times. The thermometer is at 19 Fahrenheit today. There is but little wind. What there is comes from an unfavourable quarter. The captain is in excellent humour. I think he imagines he's seen some other omen or vision, poor fellow. For during the night he came into my room early in the morning, and leaning down to my bunk, whispered to me, "It wasn't a delusion, Doctor. No, it wasn't. All's well now. All's well." Well, after breakfast, we were told to survey the ship for what food was left, and there was less than we expected. There was only one full tank left of the biscuits, 3 barrels of salt meat, and a few sundries, but there is an infinite supply of tobacco. We have 18 to 20 days at half rations at best. The captain piped all to quarters, and he addressed the entire crew. "Well, lads, dare say some of you think I brought you into this fix. Some of you are bitter on account of it. Well, remember, we've had many seasons, and there's no ship like the Polestar that has brought in as much oil, and you've all had your share of it. Well, if you got to thank me for one, you've got to thank me for the other. So let's call it quits. We've attempted a bold venture or two before, and we've succeeded. Well, if one of them fails, you no cause to cry about it. If the worst comes to the worst, we can make land across the ice and lay in a stock of seals to keep us alive till spring. It won't come to that. You'll see the Scotch coast before 3 weeks out, and it'll be half rations until then. There's no favour given to anyone. Keep your hearts and pull through, and you'll pull through as we have before." Well, these few simple words had a wonderful effect upon the crew, and all of the captain's previous unpopularity was somehow forgotten. Even the old harpooner led 3 cheers for the captain. September the 16th. The wind has veered around to the north. Beg your pardon. It has veered around to the north during the night, and the ice shows some symptoms of opening out. The men are in good humour, in spite of the short allowance upon which they have been placed. Steam is kept up in the engine room, that there may be no delay should an opportunity for escape present itself. The captain is again in exuberant spirits, though he still retains that wild fey expression to the eyes, which I have already remarked upon. This burst of cheerfulness puzzles me, more than his former gloom, I must say. I cannot understand it. I think I mentioned in an earlier part of this journal that one of his oddities is that he never permits any person to enter his cabin, but insists upon making his own bed, such as it is, and performing every other duty for himself. Well, to my surprise, he handed me the key to go inside, for he wanted me to take the time by his chronometer whilst he was measuring the altitude from the sun at noon. It is a bare room with only a few books within it and uniforms and the like, but there is one watercolor sketch of a young lady, and that is set at the end of his berth, and his eyes are continuously upon it. There's nothing much else within that room besides a pouch of tobacco and some oriental hookah which may give colour to the notion that he has once gone to war. 11:20 p.m. The captain has just gone to bed after a long and interesting conversation on general topics. When he chooses, he can be a most fascinating companion, being remarkably well read and having the power of expressing his opinion forcibly without appearing dogmatic. I hate to have my intellectual toes trod upon. He spoke upon the nature of the soul and sketched out the views of Aristotle and Plato upon the subject in a masterly manner. Well, he bid good night and retired to his room. The wind blows from the north, and I have hopes that tomorrow we may be freed up from our frozen fetters. But the nights do draw in now. They are as dark as they are in England. So the ice is refreezing. I hold to hope. I hold to hope. September 17th. The bogey again. Well, thank heaven that I have strong nerves. The superstition of these poor fellows and the circumstantial accounts which they give with the utmost earnestness and self-conviction would horrify any man not accustomed to their way. There are many versions of the matter, but the sum total of them all is that something uncanny has been flitting around the ship all night, and that Sandy MacDonald of Petershead and Lang Peter Williamson of Shetland saw it, as also did Mr. Milne upon the bridge. So having three witnesses, they can make a better case than the second mate did. I spoke to Mr. Milne about it, and as an officer, I expected him to be above such things. Well, he said to me that he didn't call it a ghaist, and that it was no sea boggle. Well, he told me that my blood would run cold if I'd seen what he'd seen. That white shape coming out of the darkness towards him. Or if I'd heard it scream like he had. The scream like a lamb that had lost its mother. Well, it was hopeless to reason with him. These spectral alarms have had a bad effect on the captain. I tried to conceal it from him, but he overheard some of the men speaking about it, and as I feared, it brought about all of his latent lunacy in an exaggerated form. He paced about the quarterdeck like some kind of caged tiger, and every so often, now and then, he stopped and made strange, yearning gestures and long, fixed stares out across the ice. But a little time, my love. But a little time now. A little time, my love. Well, what was the man going on about? Was there ever a man in such a position as me, with a demented captain and a ghost-seeing mate? But the ice may be opening. It may be. And so there is a chance that we may be able to get ourselves out of all of this and away from here tomorrow. 12 p.m. I have been a good deal startled, though I feel steadier now, thanks to a stiff glass of brandy. After all, it was nothing very alarming. It was a mere sound, that's all. I cannot expect that anyone reading this, if anyone ever should read it, will sympathize with my feelings or realize the effect which it produced upon me at the time. Supper was over, and I had gone on deck to have a quiet pipe before turning in. The night was very dark, so dark that standing upon just underneath the quarter boat, I was unable to see the officer upon the bridge. I think I've already mentioned the extraordinary silence which prevails over these frozen seas. In other parts of the world, be they ever so barren, there is some slight vibration of the air, some faint hum, be it from distant haunts of men or from the leaves of trees or the wings of birds or even the faint rustle of grass that covers the ground. One may not even actively perceive the sound, and yet, were it to be withdrawn, it would be missed. It is only here, in these Arctic seas, that the stark, unfathomable stillness obtrudes itself upon you in all its gruesome reality. You find your tympanum straining to catch the little murmur and dwelling eagerly upon every accidental sound within the vessel. Well, in this state, I was there leaning against the bulwarks, and from the ice underneath me, I heard a cry, sharp and shrill, and with a note that no prima donna has ever matched. Well, it mounted and crescendoed to a long wail of agony. It expressed grief, unutterable grief. There was a longing in the note, and dare I say it, some kind of exultation. Well, I glared into the darkness, and I could discern absolutely nothing. I went down the companionway, down below decks, and I met Mr. Milne below. He said to me simply, "Well, Doctor, do you know Harriet Skirlin?" Well, perhaps I had. I passed him by quickly enough, and I made no other comment upon this superstitious nonsense. September 18th. Passed a restless and uneasy night, still haunted by the strange sound. The captain does not look as if he has had much repose either, for his face is haggard and his eyes bloodshot. I have not told him of my last adventure, nor shall I. He is already restless and excited, standing up, sitting down, and apparently unable to keep still at all. A fine lead appeared in the pack ice this morning, and we were able to cast off our ice anchor at last and steam about 12 miles in a southwesterly direction. We were then brought to a halt. It was by a great floe of ice, as massive as that which we have left behind us. It bars our progress. It bars it so completely that we can do nothing but anchor again and wait until it breaks up, which it will probably do within the next 24 hours, if the wind holds. If it holds. Well, the captain is gloomy despite our miraculous escape. Suppose you think it's all right now? I suppose you think we're all fine, do you, Doctor? Well, I certainly hope so. We mustn't be too sure. I mean, don't doubt too much. Yeah, I suppose we'll all be in the arms of our true loves before long, eh? Well, we mustn't be too sure. We mustn't be too sure. This place is dangerous. treacherous, and with only one slip, a man could fall down a crack. There'll only be bubbles on green water to show where he sank. And all these years in this country, I never thought of making a will. Man should have his affairs in order, don't you agree? Well, yes, I certainly agree. Well, if anything should happen, you'll look after things for me, won't you? Divide my share and what I have amongst the crew. My chronometer is yours, though. Call it a remembrance of our voyage. I can rely on you, and I nod if necessary. Well, certainly. I mean, and as you have taken this step, then certainly I might as well. You, you. What the devil is the matter with you? I mean, I don't mean to be peppery about it. I don't like hearing a young fellow hardly begun life talking about death. Why don't you go back on deck, get some fresh air, instead of talking nonsense and making me do the same? Well, the more I reflect on our conversation together, the more I do not like it. Mr. Milne pooh-poohs my fears. He says it is simply the skipper's little way. Well, he has a rosy view of the situation and assures me we will be free of the ice before long. I certainly hope Mr. Milne is right. The long impending catastrophe has come at last. I hardly know what to write about. The captain is gone. He may come back to us alive, but I fear me. I fear me. It is now 7 o'clock of the morning of the 19th of September. I spent the whole night traversing the great ice floe in front of us, with a party of seamen in the hope of coming across some trace of him, but in vain. I shall try to give some account of the circumstances which attended upon his disappearance. Should anyone ever chance to read these words which I put down, I trust that they will remember I do not write from conjecture or from hearsay, but that I, a sane and educated man, am describing accurately what actually occurred before my very eyes. My inferences are my own, but I shall be answerable for the facts. The captain remained in excellent spirits after our conversation. He was nervous, impatient, and on deck 7 times in a quarter of an hour. Well, I tried not to let him on his own. Of course, I could not see him in his cabin, but I was always there upon deck, keeping him in sight. After supper, he went out onto the poop once more. Now, the night was dark, very still, save for some melancholic soughing of the wind in the spars. And a thick cloud was coming up from the northwest, which had ragged tentacles which it threw out in front of it as if it were drifting across in front of the face of the moon, which only shone now and again through a rift in the rack. The captain paced rapidly, backwards and forwards, and seeing me still dogging him, which at that point he hinted that I should go below, and I need hardly say that it had the effect of strengthening my resolution to remain upon deck. Well, I think he forgot about my presence after this, for he stood silently, leaning over the taffrail and peering out across the great desert of snow, part of which lay in shadow, which part glinted mistily in the moonlight. Several times I could see by his movements that he was referring to his watch, and once he muttered a short sentence, of which I could only catch the word ready, ready, ready. Well, I confess, having felt an eerie feeling creeping over me as I watched the loom of his tall figure through the darkness and noted how completely he fulfilled the idea of a man keeping a tryst. But a tryst with whom? Some vague perception began to draw upon me as I perceived one fact with another, but I was utterly unprepared for the sequel. There was a sudden intensity in the captain's attitude, as if he had seen something that seemed to be wreathed in the mist. There was a mist blown in line with the ship. It was dim and nebulous, but a body of mist, devoid of shape to me, but more or less apparent as the moon fell on it. And the moon was dimmed by the canopy, the thinnest cloud that you'd ever see, like a coating of an anemone. The captain, at this shape of mist out in the darkness, suddenly leapt forwards. "Coming, lass, I'm coming," he cried out. And then the next thing happened in an instant, and I had no power whatsoever to intervene. With one spring, he leapt up onto the bulwarks, and with another, out onto the ice. And he almost landed at the feet of whatever this pale, misty figure was. He reached out his hands as if to grasp it, and he ran out into the darkness with outstretched arms and loving words. His voice trailed away into the distance, and the moon shone across the great field of ice, and once again I caught sight of a dark figure running with full speed across the frozen plain. It was my last glimpse. I organized a party of men. We swept the ice as far as we could, but found nothing. There will be another party in a few hours. I must say that the entire experience is starting to feel like some kind of hideous nightmare. 7:30 p.m. Just returned, dead beat, and utterly tired out from a second unsuccessful search for the captain. The floe is of enormous extent, for though we have traversed at least 20 miles of its surface, there have been no sign of its coming to an end. The frost has been so severe of late that the overlying snow is frozen as hard as granite. Otherwise, we might have had some footsteps to guide us. The crew are anxious that we should cast off and steam around the floe and so to the southward. For the ice has opened up during the night and the sea is visible upon the horizon. They argue that Captain Craigie is certainly dead, and that we are all taking our lives in our hands to no purpose by remaining where we have an opportunity of escape. Mr. Milne and I have had the greatest difficulty in persuading them to wait until tomorrow night, and have been compelled to promise that we will not under any circumstances delay our departure longer than that. We propose, therefore, to take an hour's sleep and then to start upon a final search. September 20th, evening. I crossed the ice this morning with a party of men exploring the southern part of the floe, whilst Mr. Milne went off in a northerly direction. We pushed on for 10 or 12 miles without seeing a trace of any living thing except a single bird, which fluttered a great way over our heads, and by which its flight I should judge must have been a falcon. The southern extremity of the ice field tapered away into a long, narrow spit, which projected out into the sea. When we came to the base of this promontory, the men halted, but I begged them to continue to the extreme end of it, that we might have the satisfaction of knowing that no possible chance had been neglected. Well, hardly had we gone another 100 yards before one of the men cried out, and I began to run. First, I saw only a dark shape upon the snow, and then that darkness on the white ice formed into a shape as we raced forwards, then into the shape of a man, then into the shape of a man that we knew and that we searched for. Captain Craigie was lying on a frozen bank. There were crystals of ice and feathers of snow fallen upon him. They sparkled against his dark seaman's coat. And as we came up towards him, there was a puff of wind that caught some of the flakes of snow in a vortex, and they whirled in the air, and they sped off in the direction of the sea, all whirling together in a patch of white, and I saw only a snowdrift. That's all I saw. But some of the men, they said they saw the shape of a woman who bent down to that corpse and kissed it, and then hurried away across the floe. Well, look, I have never been one to ridicule or deride another's opinion, however strange. Captain Craigie, it is certain, met no painful end, for there was a bright smile upon his pinched features. His hands were outstretched, as though grasping whatever strange visitor it was, summoned him to a world beyond the grey. We buried him at noon, wrapped up in the ship's ensign, with a 32-pound ball of shot at his feet. I read the service, and the rugged, hardened sailors all wept like children at losing their captain. A sullen splash saw him go down into the watery depths, and a flickering white patch against the eternal darkness there glimmered for a moment and then faded and was gone. Gone until the sea offers up her dead. I pray Nicholas Craigie's lot is a happier one now than it was in this life. I shall not continue my journey. I had some hope that it would see out the voyage, but now I can see the road home plain before us. The great ice fields have parted, and soon they will be a memory of the past. And I am writing these few final words in my lonely cabin, and I still sometimes fancy that I can hear the quick steps of my captain as he paces forward and backward across the deck overhead. I went into his cabin to do as he asked, to divide what little articles he had amongst the crew. The picture that sat at the foot of his berth was gone. It had been cut out of the frame with a knife. Now, that is the very last piece of evidence that I shall submit here in my journal, and with that, I close my strange diary of the Polestar and its captain. Now, my friends, I read this journal, and I wish to present it to all of you. I did speak to some friends of mine, some naval friends, and asked them their opinions of the man that was mentioned, Nicholas Craigie. Only one that I spoke to knew of him, had known him as a younger man, known him on the shores of Ireland, known a particular sadness that came upon the man's life. He was engaged at one time, a beautiful young girl. Sadly, there was some peculiar horror that happened. The young girl was lost at sea. Poor girl. Poor man, too. Well, my friends, so ends the sad tale of the captain of the Polestar. Now, I wanted to read it to you, my friends, for it was penned by Arthur Conan Doyle. I had the pleasure of going to the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Scotland not long ago for my Ghost Stories for Christmas tour. And of course, this weekend, this Friday and Saturday, we will be down in Portsmouth and then in Canterbury. So if you are joining us there, I look forward to having your company. But in our offerings across the ether online, we are turning towards Christmas thoughts again as well. And we will have two Christmas specials for you. The first of which will be on the 4th of December with a very interesting tale for Christmas of Lucky's Grove. So please do join me around the fireside. But until then, good night. God bless.